I did not get the big deal about Big Pun. I was not. I liked the last couple singles, like "Don't Want to Be a Player" as well as "Be Like Pun." It's so hard, but I was like, I talented rapper, talented lyricist, but it just wasn't my. He just wasn't my cup of tea.
You know what it was? He
Tell me
was
what it
an
was.
incredibly talented rapper. Incredibly talented rapper and lyricist. I think obviously his weight and being able to rap the way that he rapped and keep his breath as long as he was able to do at his weight level was seen as a gimmick to a lot of people. Like, oh my god, like it was something to see. It was a sight to behold. It's like people who just are surprised that Eminem raps the way he raps because he's white, right? Like it's something you don't expect. But I think, especially in the Puerto Rican market and the Boricua market, Pun hit different at that time. But then again, you definitely all the singles you mentioned, but you definitely, probably the most iconic Pun verse of all time is that singular verse from Twins Deep Cover 98. So to this day, there's still a lot of rappers that have trouble just getting around the multisyllabic nature of that line.
So my issue is he was a New York legend. His death made him a national legend. So that's just the thing. And Pun's video wasn't like that on MTV. He kind of was getting lost in the shuffle behind Biggie, behind Wu-Tang, behind Pac, behind Busta, behind DMX, behind Jay-Z. So
though I feel if Pun hadn't died at 28 years old, I feel like if Pun had a couple more years, things like that, I really think things could have, blown up for
you finna
Pun.
say that he would have taken Jay-Z's place? Because I'm finna tell you all the ways you're wrong.
I don't want to say that because Jay-Z reached another level himself. Like Jay-Z needed some time to kind of like evolve himself. I don't think Pun would have necessarily taken Jay-Z's spot, but I think it would have made the pool a little bit more, have a couple more sharks in it. But not necessarily take.
There were a lot of sharks in the pool at that time. You had Ja Rule, you had DMX, you still had Cash Money Records in the South. You still had the West Coast South trying to make a name for themselves. You still had Jay-Z. You still had like Wu-Tang was kind of trying to do something. You had the Rise of the Locks, the Maces, the Cameron, the this and the this and the this. I think yes, I do believe that Pun is a talented lyricist, but I do wonder if we have these things where like Eminem, because he's a rapper that is white. People who feel like because he is a white rapper that he gets more notoriety than the content. I was an Eminem. I like Eminem's music. I mean, I have not listened to an Eminem album in the better part of 20 years. But when there was a time, there was a time. Do I think that Big Pun's, I do not like talking about this on March 9th because, the greatest rapper of all time died today. Or my number two, I would say, or he's my number three, actually. But one of the greatest rappers of all time, died, 27 years ago? So, and his mom recently passed away. So, God rest Violetta Wallace.
Yeah. She did a lot behind the scenes for a lot of people. Man.
I think what thing with Pun was just putting the Bronx on his shoulders, right? And when you're talking about 400+ pound dude out here who could have essentially have been one of those undiscovered guys, like had Fat Joe and Cuban Link and them not really kind of like giving him the machinations to get where he needed to be, Pun could have been the greatest rapper from the South Bronx and nobody ever heard of. but thankfully was given that platform. Another dude who died incredibly young that I feel like, doesn't get talked about enough and could have been a major player in the game, even if he wouldn't have released any records, just in his writing and his lyricism. We talk about another guy, Harlem dude, and Big L. I mean, Big L, just on his freestyle mixtapes alone, was murdering up the scene. To a point that there's a long-standing rumor that Jay, heard one of his freestyle mixtapes was like, I'm not touching this dude. Like, I can't. They wanted a young Jay-Z to kind of go one-on-one with Big L. He was like, I can't, I'm not going to do it. The long-standing, rumor and innuendo in the hip-hop world about that. And to think what would have happened had Big L not been tragically murdered at the age of 24, because people just looking at his rhyme books and his freestyles and like what could have been for a guy like that. There are so many people, especially in the game, that died very early that I feel like could have had very long careers and really kind of maybe not supplanted people, but changed the course of how hip hop evolved over the years.
I can see that. I mean, Joe took the baton and did pretty freaking well for himself as far as representing the Bronx. And you just chomping away like a God damn it. Fat Joe took the baton and went further. Also, we have to remember that hip hop changed a bit. People weren't really listening to those fast melodies and stuff. Pun had to switch it up too, because his last song is so hard, and it sounded so different from everything else that he had done previously. And to be honest with you, even though he was fat, people thought he was handsome.
Hence why my man had a lot of problems with infidelity with his wife.
There are a lot of problems with putting his hands on his wife too. We forget to talk about that.
I knew his wife, my mother, God rest her soul. I knew his wife personally. His wife actually would babysit for me. I grew up with his son. I would, when my mother had to work nights and she didn't have a babysitter, she knew Pun's wife, and I would actually go to their house over by the back of behind where Spofford used to be, because that's where he used to live, up the hill, back behind Spofford Juvenile Detention Center. So I would spend nights there, babysit by his wife. And there were times, listen, that I slept over that home, and Pun was in the neighborhood, and Pun came home, and both of them. I will not say that Pun did not do what people have said he did, because he has done it, and I've heard it. I've never seen him put his hands on her, but I've seen things and heard things. But I definitely do know that, there were many times where she went at just as hard as him. That was a very toxic relationship for the both of them. But again, I always say, like, as a man, you need to step away from things like that and not react in certain ways.
So to jump in, and before we move forward, I do agree with a lot of what you guys said about Pun. New York rap at that time when Pun was out, it was a lot to compete with. And as you said, the names that kind of died early, Big L, Pun, and then you had the names that survived everything. You had Busta Rhymes, you had Tribe Called Quest, you had Q-Tip, you had a lot of rappers that people just don't name, that New York rappers. You had a little bit of Jadakiss and Lox just coming out.
Yep.
You had Black Rob. You had a bunch of people, of course, Biggie, Nas, all